Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Family Ministry Podcast. I'm Nick, I'm your host, and in today's episode I talk with Katie Edwards, the junior high pastor at Saddleback Church, and Katie and I talk about middle school ministry, or junior high ministry as we talk about the different names there. And Katie's done that for a long time there as we talk about how to help people better understand middle schoolers, because that can be hard, right? And also how do they help middle schoolers understand just how much Jesus loves them. So it's a great interview. She talks about what they teach, how they train and lead their volunteers, what the focus is on there, what's unique about middle school, and how they use that in their planning, which I think is really, really helpful. But before we jump into that interview, I can't believe it, but we're coming up on 1 year of the podcast. We're coming up on the 1 year anniversary, which is crazy. It's gone by really, really fast. We've had a ton of great interviews each week. It's been a lot of fun. I know for me, it's been really, really helpful. I hope it's been helpful to you as well. So to celebrate that, we're going to be giving some stuff away. So be sure to just do what you do already. If you listen to the podcast, keep listening. If you subscribe to the email list, you'll see information there. If you like the Facebook page, wherever you listen or get information, just stay tuned because we're going to be giving some stuff away. But we're also going to do a special Q&A episode. One of the things I ask if you subscribe to my email list is I send you a bunch of free stuff and great resources and links to things that I think would be helpful. But one of the emails asks, what would you like to hear about on the podcast or for me to write about on the blog? And there's a bunch of questions that have been sent in, in the past year or more, and we haven't been able to hit them all. And so I'm going to do a Q&A where I'm going to try to answer some of those questions, but you're certainly not getting the best there. That's why I have guests on every week, so you can really get people who are experts in these areas. But there's a lot of these questions we couldn't hit, so I'm going to do a special Q&A episode. But I want to let you know because you can go ahead and send more questions in, and you can do that by emailing them. Just email me at nick@nickblevins.com. You can send it on Twitter, just at Nick Blevins. Send whatever your question is. You can also go right on my site, nickblevins.com, and leave a voicemail. Just on the right there, click the Ask a Question button, and then using your computer or your phone or whatever, you can kind of leave a voicemail with your question. It'd be great if you said who you were, where you're from, and then ask whatever question you have. And what we'll do is we'll kind of compile all those, pick the ones we feel like, are going to help the most people that are listening, and just do a special Q&A episode answering a bunch of questions. So that'll be a lot of fun. Can't wait to celebrate 1 year on the podcast. Got a special interview coming up to kick off kind of the next year, which will be a lot of fun. It'll be a repeat guest, the first repeat guest, which will be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you all for listening. Obviously, none of this exists without you. I hope it's been helpful to you. That's why I started it. Obviously, it was a little bit selfish because I get to learn from great leaders every week, but I started the podcast because I knew it was an easy way to help a lot of us learn from great leaders every week. So thank you for listening, for sharing, for leaving ratings and reviews on iTunes, all that stuff. Just love that. So thank you. And go ahead and send those questions in over the next few weeks. But right now we're going to jump into my interview with Katie Edwards of Saddleback Church. Well, today I get to talk with Katie Edwards. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, my name is Katie Edwards, and I am the junior high pastor at Saddleback Church in California. It's actually my home church where I started coming to Saddleback when I was 13 in junior high myself, and then came on staff when I was 21. So I've been on staff for 21 years now here at Saddleback, the majority of that in junior high, but all of it in student ministry. And for the last 8 years, I've been the pastor of junior high. And I'm married. I've been married for 19 years to a fourth grade teacher who's the best. And I have 3 kids, a high schooler, a middle schooler, and a kindergartner. So I've got a big range happening in my house. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm in California. Did I say that? So
you did, and sometimes that'll make people jealous. Although it's getting nicer weather everywhere now. Yes. So, but like in the winter months, that makes me jealous when I talk to people from California.
Yeah. I'm living the dream out here, basically. So it's great.
That's awesome. And you went to Saddleback when you were 13. That's really cool.
Yeah. When I was in junior high, it was a lot different and a lot smaller. There was about eight 8 kids in the junior high ministry when I started coming here.
Awesome.
And even when I was in high school, there was about 30 or 40 students in the high school ministry, but that's where I came to Jesus and started serving and, started serving in junior high ministry my senior year of high school. So it was cool. Yeah.
That's really cool. And so a lot of what the rest of church world knows of Saddleback happened when you were like just out of high school in your 20s, I would imagine. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, that is one of the fun parts of longevity and being in one spot. There's benefits to going to all different churches, but I think the benefit for being in this place is just have seen God do so many cool things and have just seen so much change. And it's been really cool to be a part of that journey here at the church.
Yeah, and you've had Rick Warren as your pastor for all that time, one lead pastor, and then
my whole life, and my boss, really, truly, I've only had 2 bosses in my whole life, him and Kurt Johnston. So,
that's awesome. Yeah.
So it's not too bad.
Yeah. That's cool. I have to say this so a friend of mine, he was part of a church where they kind of had their own church planning conference, and I think they still might. And they'd have many speakers, come through there from the church world, pastors, church planners, things like that. And it's funny, he would always tell me about when they had Rick Warren come, just how great he is in person and relationally. It's so much so that he tells the story of like, it was Rick's time to be on stage and they're like, where is he? And they go out in the lobby and he's just hanging out talking with people like on the couches. They're like, you're on in like 3 minutes. Like we need to get you. And for him, that was just awesome because they had seen some other versions, I guess you could say, where it was like, man, it's just really cool. That he was connecting with people and stuff like that. So that's cool.
Yeah, that's totally him. He's very approachable and, he's just a real human. And so sure, they told him he was on in 3 minutes and then he just walked right on stage and was brilliant and
probably
had no notes or anything. I mean, he's pretty incredible. So that's
fun. So we're going to talk about what you do. So we would call it middle school because that's what we call it right here. You call it junior high. Is that how, like in California, is it typically it's junior high? That's what the schools are called?
We have both. So in my setting, about 40% of my students are in middle school. And then the other percentage is in junior high, which is just 7th and 8th grade. So our ministry is just 7th and 8th grade, just because the majority of our kids are in that school setting. Okay,
I got you. See, because sometimes that's the distinction then, the 7th, 8th versus 6th through 8th. Around here now, they're all 6th through 8th. But even when they were 6 or 8 years ago, they were called junior high, but that kind of went away for, I don't know why. And so now they're all called middle school. So it's interesting to me to see the dynamic. I just talked to a guy the other day who's in Canada and they call it junior high. And I was like, I actually don't know what the delineation is there, throughout the country where it's different and all that.
Yeah, I think middle school is the more common used term, just kind of everywhere. So most of my friends who do middle school ministry, I mean, that's the terminology we use. But yeah, so technically here it's junior high.
Cool. Well, what I'll probably end up saying middle school, but whatever it is, that's what we're going to talk about. That age group, 6th through 8th, 7th and 8th. And I just want to ask first, why do you love working with middle schoolers? And I'll preface this with our pastor was a student pastor for 13 years before our church was planted. And like 7 of those, he was the middle school pastor. And he'll joke every now and then. He loved it. I mean, he absolutely loved it. But he'll joke that somebody once told him that middle school ministry is where you go to like pay the price for your sins. And he's like, so I had to be there for 7 years. So I don't know what I did. But the reality is he loved it. So, yeah. And he loves being a pastor now. But what do you love about working with middle schoolers?
Middle school to me is probably, I think it's the most exciting age group to be in. And now I'm biased because I've given my life to middle school, but it is really an important, probably one of the first really true important turning point kind of as a human. Kids ministry, I think, spends a lot of time filling up our kids with knowledge and Bible stories and education, which I think is just such a big part of elementary school. But junior high is really where they're turning this corner towards adulthood. And it feels weird to say a junior higher is becoming an adult, but that's really where the process begins. And it's so exciting to be in this age group. They're young and they're moldable and they're fun and they're energetic, but at the same time, they're going through this really rapid phase of development, which is, again, kind of this turning point towards adulthood, which means they're starting to think differently. They're starting to make decisions, wanting to be independent, wanting to kind of be curious and discover kind of their uniqueness. So to me, it's a really, really important area of the church to be in, because it's kind of the beginning of the process of adult faith. Without a great middle school ministry, the building blocks of the rest of the age groups and phases of adulthood, I think, get thrown off, so to speak, because this is the time to intersect with a teenager, is on this front end. So I love middle school ministry because it's so exciting. It's so fun. It's predictable and unpredictable. So I don't know. I want to be in the most exciting place in the church, and I think it's middle school.
That's awesome. I actually say that to potential volunteers when they're not sure, like, maybe I want to work with older, fourth, fifth grade, like older kids, or maybe student ministry. And usually there is a sense, if they haven't done it before, there's like a sense of fear of like, I don't know though. But like the way I'll describe it is it's a big commitment, especially in our setting, and similar to you, it's the small group matters more. The investment in their life matters more. For us, it's a different time of it's a different night of the week and all that. It's more hours. But the thing I say is it's really, really fun. And it's not that the other stuff's not fun. Our kids ministry is amazing fun.
Sure.
But I think the energy is a good word for it. The excitement, like it peaks there for sure, which is pretty cool.
Well, and I think it's like an energy and an excitement without fear. So I think once you move into high school, our high schoolers are a little bit more reserved, a little bit more fear. I mean, middle schoolers are a little bit more fearless. So you have them in this really cool time where, I don't know, they're still willing to like do crazy stuff and be crazy, before, the kind of everybody's watching me thing sets in. So I don't know. It's just a really, really cool time to intersect with people.
Yeah. I noticed when teaching middle school and high school, and the one example I think of is one time when I wanted their input on this kind of what we were talking about. And it wasn't about a right or wrong. It was like, hey, what do you think about this? Middle school, they're giving me all kind of stuff. High school, it's like, I don't want to talk because what if I'm wrong and then I'm embarrassed? That fear is so strong. I mean, so strong. So you're right, in high school. And it is a little more fun when it's not quite as strong in middle school. That probably leads to some other things too, where they should be more afraid.
Yeah, I know. You want them to filter a little bit, but fearlessness and faith combined is really exciting.
Yep. How can you help everyone listening? So we'll have some middle school leaders listening, a lot of pastors that lead middle school, volunteers. How can you help them lead their volunteers to understand middle schoolers more? Because that is probably part of what the problem is they just don't understand, either before they volunteer or even as a volunteer. They don't know how to understand them. I think we blocked that out of our memory in our own history or something. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. I think that's really true, actually. Oh, I mean, I think I get and you probably have gotten this before too, where people ask me what I do and I say, I'm a middle school pastor, and they're like, oh my gosh, God bless you. Like, middle schoolers are crazy, and typically my response to that is, yes, middle schoolers are crazy, but do you understand why they're crazy? And really kind of coming back to adolescent development and kind of the different, middle schoolers are going through 5 to 6 phases of development all at the same time. It's the second most rapid phase of development in a human's life. So 0 to 2 is the first most rapid, and then 11 to 14. And so they're changing physically, emotionally, socially. Obviously there's tons of brain and intellectual change that's happening. And then spiritually, they're changing and turning a corner, and faith is changing. And so I usually tell people, like, you were crazy too once. You went through all this stuff, but you probably blocked it out because it was crazy. When you're a middle schooler, it is crazy that you're going through so much change and navigating that on top of culture and everything else that's going on in your life. It makes it really challenging. And I think for youth workers and for parents, so, I'm a parent of a middle schooler and a high schooler, and I think really kind of having an understanding of what's happening in that developmental process, I think lowers the frustration level a little bit, and then also helps meet them where they're at a little bit more. So when I'm like, why is this, why is a student doing this, or why is my own kid doing this? A lot of times you can point back to things that they're figuring out and navigating in development, and especially in their spiritual development, in their faith, because they're going from this kind of place of concrete thinking. Fifth graders, I think, are probably the most spiritually mature people on the planet, because they're confident and everything's black and white, happy, sad, good, bad. But then, as you go into middle school, you kind of have your abstract thinking starts to kick in, and you start to wrestle and doubt and, well, why do I love Jesus? And how do I know the Bible's true? And you start to think in layers and questions. And I think all of those things help us to write lessons and know how to meet them where they're at when we're teaching and preaching. How do we train a small group leader to meet a middle schooler where they're at? So I think, one of the things that anybody who's working with middle schoolers, kind of becoming experts on middle schoolers, who they are, where they're at, what's actually happening in kind of this layered development, I think helps us in so many different areas of middle school ministry. Some of my favorite resources on this are the phase book is so one of my favorite things for understanding the middle school phase. Yeah. There's some new 6th, 7th, and 8th grade mini phase books coming out in a couple of weeks, which are going to be awesome. Understanding Your Young Teen by Mark Ostreicher, I think, is it's written for parents, but I give it to my volunteers because it's just such a great perspective on who our audience of middle schoolers are. And I think that's a lot of times in middle school ministry, what is tricky is that people want the middle school audience to be in a certain place versus really knowing where they are and being thoughtful about understanding them and meeting them in that place. Does that make sense?
That's great. Okay. Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Do you, in addition to like some of those resources you mentioned, with volunteers at Saddleback, is there something you do when they're coming on board to help them understand middle schoolers more? Like, do you use any of these with them? Do you do your own stuff? And even do you do something like as they've been serving for a couple of years to kind of remind them?
Yeah, anytime I'm with my volunteers. So we meet probably 6 times throughout the year. We gather together for like community and training and that kind of thing. Every time I'm with volunteers, we're talking about middle school development. We're talking about where a 7th grader is at, where an 8th grader is at, how to meet them in those places, what they're thinking about and asking questions about, and how to, come alongside of them. So every time we're together, we talk about something about a middle schooler, helping all of us continue to grow and be thoughtful about where they're at. I think in years past, I've had adult leaders who come in with an agenda, and I'm going to teach them this, and I'm going to impart this on them. And I think that's totally an okay thing, to be passionate about teaching something to a middle schooler, but also kind of shifting that mindset to, yes, but where are they, and how do we form some of the things that we're going to do that really kind of hit them where they're at? So yeah, every time we're together, we talk about something. I would say, the Orange has a ton of stuff. Like I said, the phase stuff is really awesome. I use that with parents and with my volunteers, but also I've written a lot of training out of Understanding Your Young Teen. Also Middle School Ministry by Scott Rubin and Mark Ostreicher. There's some really great stuff in that book too. Also the My books, My Faith, My Friends, My School, My Changes. Those books are great too, because they're written for middle schoolers, and they really kind of put you in their mindset in some of those places. It's really great.
So you'll pull content from these books and then use it in those trainings when you gather. Is that kind of how you do that? And obviously it's really important. You're saying it's so important you do it every time.
Yes.
Which is good. That's awesome.
Totally. It's really easy to forget about where middle schoolers are. So I'm constantly learning in this area. There's always new stuff, new encouraging things. So when I'm training volunteers, I'm pulling from all sorts of stuff, anything that I'm reading or a blog that I read or something that shines light on a middle schooler, those are all things that I'm passing along or writing training for my leaders, everything I go to basically.
What, in terms of in the same mindset, what does a middle schooler need from their leader? If people have small group leader models or whatever the model is, there's somebody who's, an influence in their life. What do they need from them? What are the top things that come to your mind?
Totally. Well, I love the small group leader relationship with a middle schooler. I think it's so powerful. I think it's the best thing that we do is small groups. Again, I think sometimes in a small group setting, small group leaders come into the role wanting to teach a Bible study, or whatever. But I love kind of the idea of, we call it life group, so it's coming alongside of them, discipling them in life, not just through one Bible study. So for me, I think from their small group leader, they need relationship, fun, because fun, I think, leads to trust. And I think trust eventually leads to depth. Affirmation is huge in middle school. I think in the great stuff and the not great stuff, just affirming who they are, who God's made them to be, affirming next steps, things like that. I think small group leaders, daily bite-sized wisdom versus gigantic lessons, I think land with a middle schooler sometimes better. So a lot of times I'll tell my leaders, you might accomplish more in a car ride conversation home from small group than, maybe this elaborate, awesome lesson that you planned for small group time. Sometimes that's just the way it works. I think middle schoolers kind of learn in all different ways. So I would teach and coach in all different ways as a small group leader. And I think the little bite-sized stuff, little pieces of scripture here or pointing them here or pieces of wisdom or coaching in kind of bite-sized pieces, I think are huge. Consistent time, I think is huge too. Consistency is big. So yeah.
That's good. That's good. We want to talk about so we're talking about how we can understand middle schoolers better, but obviously the goal is to understand them and then help them understand God and understand how much Jesus loves them and all that. But before we kind of talk about that, I think it would be helpful too to hear what the strategy or programming looks like at Saddleback for anyone who isn't aware. So, what was kind of the main ways that you do serve junior high students?
Right. So our youth ministry is aligned with our church's vision, which is, basically purpose-driven youth ministry, or purpose-driven ministry with teenager-friendly language. Yeah. But our program is basically the way that we program our ministry is out of the vision, thinking through the audience and kind of where they are in their spiritual commitment. So we basically have 3 arenas that we do ministry to middle schoolers. The first arena is what we call large group. And it's not based on numbers. It's just the majority of all of our students fall into the first arena. And that would be like our weekend we have a weekend church service for junior high that happens at the same time as the adult church service. And it's an hour and 10 minutes, and it is a church service geared for junior high. Also in that large group arena is like summer camp or any event that we would invite anyone to be a part of. So, and really the goal in that first arena is to expose students to Jesus Christ, the 5 purposes of the church, and just the kingdom as a whole. But the key word in that is expose. So we're working hard to, in those places, that's where a lot of first-time students will come, but also kids who love Jesus will come. So that arena has a really wide spectrum of spiritual commitment, as far as there are kids who are sold out and there are kids that are seeking in that place. So a lot of our programming is programming for that spectrum. Then the second arena is small group. So, that's just exactly what it is. Students are broken down into small groups with 2 small group leaders. They meet midweek in homes, and they're divided up by grade and gender. And in that small group time, it's a little bit of more of a spiritual commitment because they're committing to being part of a small group. It's basically being in the discipleship process. So we're doing a little bit of a deeper level of Bible teaching, a little bit of a deeper level of intentional and thoughtful discipleship. And, it's just, again, in a different setting than kind of the large group arenas. Also in that small group arena would be things like mission trips and things like that, where students are broken down in a smaller group, and we're being a little bit more intentional and next level with those students who are at a different level of spiritual commitment. And then the third arena is what we call individual life. So it's all the places in our ministry where there's opportunities for students to express stuff on their own as a Christ follower. So there's things that students are doing, next steps, they're serving, maybe they're getting baptized, sharing their testimony. Maybe they're doing missions type stuff, but they're doing that all on their own. So there's no program necessarily attached with individual life. It's more just opportunities in our ministry for students to express Christ, his kingdom, and the purposes. So there's all sorts of starting points with that in our ministry, but there's no program attached to that. And then, we have quarterly events that kind of drive momentum in all of those arenas.
What do some of those look like? I think, people listening are always interested in what other events churches are doing, especially if it's something that's working well. Are those events kind of designed to invite friends, or is it really, like you said, just kind of a momentum thing, gather everyone together, or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, I think, it's a little bit of both for sure. We just try to communicate really clearly with everything that we do, kind of here's the purpose behind what we're doing. So there's very rarely things that we would turn kids. There's not things that we would say, you can't come to this, I'll use Rwanda. We took kids to Rwanda a couple months ago as an example. So Rwanda is definitely not a trip that's designed for the spectrum of sold out to seeker, But if a student genuinely wanted to come on a Rwanda trip and they were in a seeking place in their relationship with Jesus, we would still allow them to come, but we would be going through this process with them of helping them understand what the purpose of our trip is. And the purpose of our trip is to share Jesus. So you kind of need to understand that part of the process, but we wouldn't necessarily turn a student away from that, if that makes sense. Yeah. So most of the things that we have, I think, are open to any student, in our ministry, but there's definitely things that we're communicating clearly of like, this is what's happening. This is what we're doing, just so you understand. In each quarter, we do what I call a momentum event. So momentum would be something that creates momentum for our middle school ministry, and it's typically partnered with a teaching series or something like that. So in the first quarter, it's our winter camp, because winter camp just tends to be something that our students really love. It has kind of a spiritual disciplines is what the retreat is typically about and focuses on, or helping students in their own personal relationship with Jesus. And that creates momentum for that first quarter. And a lot of times we teach things around that. The second quarter is we have this really big serve kind of rally thing that we do. And then, kind of each quarter has something that it just creates a ton of momentum in our ministry. And then we build off of that momentum coming out of it. We don't do a whole lot of like one night events or like Friday night events or anything like that. They don't work for us really. So, and just simplifying and things like that. So we do a few Saturday night events throughout the year, maybe 3 or 4 that are attached to our Saturday night service. So we don't do events that stand alone. They're all attached to church in some way.
That's good. So that if they come, for the event, they can be there for service, is like that kind of thing. So it's before, it's after, or something like that.
Yeah. Years ago, we used to do like a ton of outreach stuff, but we were finding that we just weren't seeing any fruit. Like students weren't coming back, and we do stuff on Friday night, and then students would be too tired to come to church that weekend or felt like they already came to church. And so we just shifted that a little bit because we wanted to be strategic about when they're with us, and so, yeah, everything is after a church service now. And so most students invite their friends to church and then they come to the event together, which has been cool.
Yeah, we do. We've done more of that too. And in the podcast I just recorded with Justin Knowles, he was saying the same thing. So it seems like that's a trend that churches are doing less standalone events for student ministry, because student ministry used to be kind of full of them. If there was any ministry in the church that was full of events, it was student ministry. And it seems like everybody's trending towards less standalone events, more that are connected to the main program for the same reasons you mentioned, which makes sense. So with all that in mind and that strategy, and I know you're passionate about helping middle schoolers understand how much Jesus loves them, how does that work? How do you actually do that? And how does it work with all of this together? How do you help middle schoolers understand how much Jesus loves them? Because they are looking for affirmation, like you said. Their brain's changing a lot. There's just a lot going on. How do you communicate that really important thing in the midst of all this?
We say it a lot, which I know that sounds weird, but, I think repetition is key with middle school. I think sometimes in our quest as youth workers to like be creative and do like the next cool thing or whatever, we forget that sometimes just saying some of the same things over and over again, maybe in different ways, but the same things for a middle schooler is really, really key. So I think our focus in our middle school ministry, we made a shift, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where our whole focus in our small group curriculum is Jesus. We really want them to know Jesus, and also know Jesus. So know about him, but also know him personally. Because of where they're at, it's a really important time to help them dive into the gospel and really understand what that means. Because I think once a middle schooler has an understanding of the gospel, then they really begin to understand and believe that Jesus loves them so much. So, in our weekend teaching, we teach, everything comes back to Jesus, which I know sounds basic and, for sure, but I think the repetition of that is really, really key. And they do need to hear it over and over and over again. And then in small groups, our curriculum, it doesn't focus a ton on, I'm not verse by versing them through Leviticus in small group curriculum. You know what I mean? Because I'm not saying that Leviticus is not an important part of the Bible. I think for a junior higher, helping them really understand living for Jesus and him living through us, is just such an important thing for them. And to repeat that over and over and over again, the gospel over and over and over again. So our life group curriculum is really simple, and it's all centered on helping them have a deeper understanding of Jesus and then helping them explore their own relationship with him. Because I feel like those are the things that set them up best for high school, because I know our high school ministry is going to do an Old Testament survey in small group when they get there. They're going to do some next level teaching and Bible education in HSM, or in high school. And so really kind of looking at ourselves as, again, the front end of the process between junior high, high school, and college, I think is important when we're shaping what we teach and all of those kinds of things. So helping them understand how much Jesus loves them is the only thing that we're doing for the most part in our teaching stuff in junior high. So in every corner, whether it's camp, whether it's a weekend church service, whether it's a small group, mission stuff, everything kind of comes back to helping them have a deeper understanding of that.
So you're teaching a lot, practically speaking. You write your own stuff, and so you're making sure it's taught a lot about who Jesus is. It's taught a lot from the Gospels. The discussion stuff is based out of that. I mean, is that fair to say?
Yeah, totally. So if you saw our small group stuff, it's fairly simple. But yeah, all of the lessons are kind of pointing them towards this deeper understanding of their personal relationship with Jesus. I feel like it's the best place to graduate them to high school is if they can articulate the gospel, if they can articulate why they're a follower of Christ, not how they became one.
And you said it's been 5 or 6 years since you made that shift. So now you've had some years to look at the results of it. And I'm obviously guessing that you're satisfied with it. Like you think this was a good shift and you want to keep doing it.
Well, again, kind of coming back to like, I think early on we were trying to squeeze so much into these 2 or 3 years, and you feel this pressure, like I've got to teach them everything. I have to, get them through all of these things. I have to get them from, community to mission trip. And what I have really gotten comfortable with is helping each of our junior hires take 1 or 2 really big, significant steps in their faith, and in their personal relationship with Jesus, and understanding that in middle school, if they take an important step to in their faith, that's a really big deal, and I don't necessarily need to feel the pressure to teach them every single thing there is to know about being, about the Bible, about being a Christian, because I'm a part of a process. So me partnered with our high school ministry, partnered with our college ministry, we're part of a process together. And it kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off to feel like we have to do every single thing. So we've really just kind of simplified and honed in on what are the most important things, that we've kind of identified with this age group that we feel really comfortable. Like if they're in this place when they graduate, then we're setting them up to win in this next phase with high school, where our high school ministry is stellar and doing really awesome stuff, so we're in more of a partnership in the process than we are trying to, as a junior high ministry, do everything.
Which makes sense because you couldn't anyway. You don't have that much time. But
totally, for sure.
Yeah, for you all, is it a cycle? Like since you have now, you got a pretty good handle on what you want to teach. You know where it fits in the scheme of like high school and college and all of that coming out of kids ministry. Is it kind of a cycle to where, after 2 years, you're going to sort of repeat, even if things change a little bit?
Yeah, I would say I repeat probably, probably 4 series a year. I repeat. So we do a series a month, basically, is kind of how it lands for us. So 4 of those series are the same every year. We repackage them a little bit. So they look a little bit different, but really the content is the same. And for a 6th, 7th, and 8th grader, you could literally teach the same series every year and it would hit them differently because of where they're at. So like there's some series that I don't even alter too much. I just alter the packaging and some of the theming, just for the fun element. But as far as the teaching part, I could teach something to a 7th grader and teach the very next year the same thing to them as an 8th grader, and different things would hit them. Yeah. So some of that stuff is the same. Culture definitely, has a way of, there's some felt need stuff there that from time to time, we add in new stuff just because of things that are happening in culture, things that we feel like, man, we really need to help students understand this from a biblical perspective, or from this point of view in their own relationship with Jesus. So there's some of that stuff that alters that, but there's definitely repetition, just some repackaging.
I know high school is obviously not specifically where you lead, but you work together with them. Do they do more of that teaching that is intersecting with what they're facing in culture? Because I do see where high schoolers understand that more. Like middle schoolers, they're experiencing it, but maybe not asking all the same questions. Versus
sure.
High school, you really are trying to figure out what do I think about this? How does this apply to me? And so do they do that? Plus, it sounds like they also expand and try to teach a little bit more of the Bible. Like you said, Old Testament survey sounds like seminary, you know what I mean? But so
yeah.
Is that what high school looks like?
Yeah. I mean, high school, we kind of have always, when we're creating our scopes and stuff, have loosely followed this. A third of our year is doctrine. A third of our year is kind of junior high life, like Christian life in junior high, Christian life in high school. And then a third is like a little bit more felt need. So we've always kind of left our rooms or some freedom for ourselves to, as each year comes up, what are kind of the felt needs of high schoolers? What are kind of the felt needs of junior hires? And so it's kind of within that we see some of the cultural stuff come in. And yeah, it looks different for high school than junior high. They're definitely, taking things to a little bit of a different level because of the questions that high schoolers are asking.
Yeah. And it sounds like, in elementary and all that, it's like you mentioned before, they're learning a lot of the Bible. They're learning a lot of Bible stories and what they mean and all that. And then you're coming into middle school and you're doing a bigger emphasis specifically on Jesus, getting to know him, connecting with him, the teaching from the Gospels, and then almost opening up again to broaden kind of what you're teaching them. But it makes sense. Like you're saying, they're going through so much change in middle school. It makes sense to focus it there and then come back.
I think it's like my boss who I've worked with forever, Kurt, he has these pictures. So it's like a picture of a suitcase with no handles in elementary school. And he talks about how, in elementary ministry, we're just filling that suitcase with knowledge and education and memorization and some of those things that for an elementary school kid are just part of that phase. And then in junior high is where you put the handles on that suitcase. So it's helping them to carry all of that knowledge into school, into relationships, into everything, helping them to live out what they know and helping them connect kind of the head to the heart of what they know and understand. And then in high school, they have that same suitcase and then they're beginning to kind of fill it up again with things that they're going to need. That just like next level stuff that they're ready to soak in, that they weren't ready to soak in maybe in elementary or junior high. They're, expanding their thinking, they're exposed to new things in high school. So it's kind of another exciting time to kind of fill that, but they're doing both and they're filling it and carrying it at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And in some ways, maybe living it out more too. Like
totally.
High school or serving in certain ways or leading in middle school. Do you have a lot of high school students that help lead in middle school, or is that can't happen because they serve at the same time?
We do. Well, since we have we have multiple services, it helps with that. And we have some high schoolers who also serve in our small group ministry, which is midweek. So midweek, we have both junior high and high school have 2 nights where small groups meet in homes. So we have seniors in high school who are involved as small group leaders, and they're typically paired up with like someone like me, someone a little older. And then on the weekends, our rooms are side by side, which is really cool. So we have a lot of juniors and seniors who serve at our weekend service, and it's really fun to have them.
That's awesome. So is there anything that comes to mind when I say what has worked really well for you on middle school ministry lately? Because student ministry is one of the areas where change is needed maybe more often than other areas.
Yeah.
And it could be as small as like an event, or it could be as big as like in a whole shift. Kind of like you mentioned, 5 or 6 years ago, you shifted your teaching strategy. Is there something that's been working really well that you would share?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have really loved lately is we've been doing a lot of local serve stuff, and we did kind of a little local serve retreat not too long ago, a few weeks ago. And we partnered with a lot of ministries in our church and in our community to just kind of show middle schoolers that there's a lot of needs in their neighborhoods and in their community and that kind of thing. And that's been a really fun, just kind of fun thing to see unfold. We just had a couple of our students who they served with us a few weeks ago in a nursing home. They met this guy, Jack. And then a couple of weeks later, just a couple of days ago, they took an Easter basket back to Jack, who they met, through serving at this nursing home. And so it's just been fun through some of these local opportunities just to see our students doing stuff on their own outside of being at an event or anything like that. So it's just been fun. The churches, we've been partnering with things that are already taking place. So we're not necessarily planning everything or programming anything. We're just partnering with other people who are doing awesome stuff. And then our middle schoolers are really enjoying that and kind of catching the vision for that, which is really fun. So that's been working really well for us lately. I think the Saturday night events and the simplifying, that's been, an ongoing thing for us of just figuring out how to make maximum impact when we're with students and parents. So that's been, we've seen a ton of fruit and a ton of great stuff come out of simplifying, which I think sometimes we feel the pressure to do more and more, and then more things will happen. But I think really centralizing, simplifying, actually, we've seen more fruit doing those types of things and letting go of some stuff than we were when we were doing tons and tons of stuff. So that's working really well for us too, I think.
Yeah, we've experienced that as well. With the serving things that you've connected them with, has that been like on a large scale, or is that more like group by group?
The small groups, have been connecting as a small group. So we did bring everybody together for one kind of big rallying point, but for the most part, we sent them out in small groups. So, groups of like 6 or 7 students and a couple of adults, going to the Veterans Hospital, working with our foster and adopt ministry here at the church, the food pantry, nursing home. They were sent to kind of all different places. And then we've seen them go back on their own and follow up and do stuff. So it's been really cool. I was telling some of our senior leadership here at the church, I'm like, we have this army of of people to mobilize, in our junior high and high school ministry. Like, if you point us in the right direction or tell us the needs, I think our students really want to serve and do things like that. So it's been fun.
That's awesome. And you organized all that. It sounds like you it wasn't like the groups organized it, or did they?
We organized the opportunities. So we did a lot of the legwork of like making the phone calls and kind of getting the list of everything. And then, throughout the year, life groups will just pick and choose off of that menu, so to speak, of different places to connect. So a lot of times the small group leaders are doing the actual connecting with the people who are running ministry or doing things like that. I kind of view our role as like the gatherers of the information. And then the small group leaders are really kind of who mobilize the students.
That's awesome. That's cool. Well, this has been great. This is really, really helpful. I think getting a glimpse in how you do ministry there with junior high students, and just love your passion for them and how much you want to help other leaders do that well too. So thanks for coming on the podcast. And I would love to know, how can people connect with you if they want to connect on social media, or if they have any questions or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, you can totally connect with me on social media. I'm sort of okay at it. I mean, Instagram,
sort of okay.
Instagram is where I'm the most, because that's where my students are the most, which is just Katie Edwards 1212. And my Twitter is Katie Edwards 34. But you can email me too. I'm just Katie, Katiee at saddleback.com. And either myself or some of the people that I work with, would love to answer questions or send you things what we have. We're still figuring things out. I'm 21 years in and still learning new things and figuring stuff out. But what we have to share. So, if there's something that I mentioned that you'd love to see, of course, we have to share. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us. Really appreciate it.
Of course. It was so, I love talking about middle school, so it's the best.
Great. Thanks, Katie.
Of course.
That's some great wisdom there from Katie, and you can just tell her extensive experience with junior high students has clearly helped them become really good at ministering to that age group. So here are a couple action items I thought of coming out of that interview. One is get all those books she referenced. I think if you lead and serve middle school students, even if you lead in children's ministry, but you help 4th, 5th grade students, I think it'd be really helpful to, read those books, be aware of what's going on in the lives of middle schoolers. And then if you do lead middle school ministry and some volunteers, another action item would be to take that information that you learned from those books and train your team with that. I thought that was pretty interesting that Katie makes sure they talk about something related to middle schoolers and what they're like every time they gather volunteers to train. I thought that was really interesting. So all the links to the books she mentioned and all of that can be found in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 49. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, because you don't want to miss new episodes as they come out. Next week, I interview Brad Griffin of Fuller Youth Institute. We talk about the book Growing Young, which is a great book. It's been out for a little while now. So we dive into some questions that aren't kind of the general overview of the book, but real practical stuff about what that can look like in churches. What are some churches that are doing this well? How can we do it well in our churches, and all of that? So again, can't wait to celebrate a year of the podcast with you. So go ahead and submit those questions either by email or Twitter, or using the voicemail thing on the website, just at nickblevins.com. Click the Ask a Question button, whatever it might be. Go ahead and send those questions in, and we'll record that episode. It'll be a lot of fun. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.